Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight in the next of our series of debates on the policies we're seeing rolled out in the first 100 days of the second Trump administration. My name is Jessie Manisto, and I am the Director of Debates here at Braver Angels. I am coming to you from just outside our nation's capital, where the cherry blossoms are just about to hit full bloom. Our Braver Angels DC Alliance is taking a walking tour of the Tidal Basin this coming weekend, and I'm all decked out for the season. So that, of course, is not all that is happening here in Washington, D.C. So whether you support or oppose President Trump or any of his policies, I think it's safe to say that those are shaping conversation across our country and even around the world. And so too often, those conversations don't cross party lines. They don't break out of our echo chambers. We at Braver Angels were founded to address that problem, to go right there and offer a chance to hear what the other side thinks of any charged question, right out of their own mouths. So after all, they're the best people to articulate their views. And when I say them, I mean you. All of you in this room tonight, you are our experts. So we thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing what you think about the issue on the table tonight, foreign policy, whichever side of the debate you're on. You don't have to have prepared. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to speak freely and fully without fear. Listen to others in exchange as they do the same. Remember that in a Braver Angels debate, there are no winners and losers. We're not here to persuade the other side. We're here to better understand each other, to disagree more accurately in keeping with what we say in the Braver Angels way. So tonight, we will be debating resolved. The U.S. should prioritize domestic interests over international leadership. We spent a lot of time thinking about this resolution and experimented with a few different foreign policy topics and phrasings. If you subscribe to our debate team newsletter, Debate Dispatch, you may have had a chance to vote on some of those. So I hope that this one will work for most of you tonight. You feel confidently on one side or the other. I would like to point out, this is what we call a competing goods resolution. Domestic interests and international leadership are both good things. Probably most people agree with that. The key word is prioritize. Which one is more important to you if you had to pick? So beyond that, I invite you to go wherever you like with this. You can zoom in on a specific issue. You can make an argument. You can go really high and just look at foreign policy in general. You can come down on the ground. You can tell a personal story about what this means to you. Because as I'm fond of telling people, Braver Angels debates, unlike what you may have done in a high school or college debate program, are just as much about the heart as they are about the head. So if you're new to this, or if you need a refresher, let's go over how this works. First, a reminder that Braver Angels debates are recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. I hope this won't stop anyone from speaking, but I do want you to be aware of this. The procedure we will follow is pretty simple. We go back and forth with speeches in the affirmative, that is, in favor of the resolution, which tonight would be domestic interests, and then the negative, or international leadership. I will then, that will be about a 4-minute speech, going back and forth again, and between those, we will take questions of curiosity. Now, this is not the time to argue or make your own rebuttal speech. That's not how our model works. I will give you a sentence or two to give some context, but I'm going to interrupt you pretty quickly if you are making a speech. If you want to make a speech, reach out to your whip. I'll tell you how to do that in a minute, and get in the queue. If you want to respond to a previous speaker, tell your whip that. They will make sure that we know so that you can follow up rather quickly. We'll try to, we juggle a lot of things behind the scenes, but let us know. So yes, as your chair, so I will smile upon those sorts of speeches. All I ask is that when you give a speech, I want you to say what you truly believe. You may express all the uncertainty that you like. Again, we're not here to win or lose. I want to hear what you think. So yeah, it's always okay in a Braver Angels debate to say, I don't know when you're asked a question. That doesn't lose you any points. In fact, with this crowd, it might even gain you some. Let's see, what else have I got for you? Finally, oh yeah, our most famous rule. What people feel is a little bit of a idiosyncrasy if they're not used to the program, I guess. But this comes from parliamentary procedure, and it's called addressing the chair. What this means is that if you ever use the second person pronoun you, you are talking to me. Once the debate begins, I will be known as Madam Chair, and we will address the speakers as the speaker, or the man who just spoke, or the gentle lady from Nebraska, if you want to be that sort of person, or some general description like that. What this means is that when you want to ask a question of curiosity, you phrase it like this. Madam Chair, given that they must be walked every day, does the speaker believe that dogs are truly better than cats? Or perhaps, Madam Chair, the speaker suggested that woodchucks could chuck wood, but did not address the issue of quantity. Could the speaker please suggest how much wood a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? So, if this seems odd, don't worry, you will catch on. You do not have to phrase them as tongue twisters. You just have to address them to me. I will enforce that rule as well. If I butt in and say, sorry, are you asking my opinion? That's what I'm reminding you because you just said you. I won't be obnoxious if I think you're using the general you, like if you speak French, on, we don't have that in English, so we use you. I won't cut you off. That's why sometimes I let them go. But, you know, I'm going to be harsh if I think that you, not harsh, but I'm going to remind you if you're talking to each other. This allows us to turn the temperature up a little bit without getting personal, focusing on ideas rather than the individuals who are articulating them. So, how do you give a speech? Good question. My final instruction for you before we get started is on your Zoom screen. If you click on participants at the bottom, you will see our volunteer debate staff at the top of the list. We all have these asterisks by our names. In the tradition of parliamentary debate, they are known as whips, or the people you'll be talking to are, and their job is to assist you. Figure out who wants to give a speech and put them on a spreadsheet that I have on a screen up there. If you see me looking up, that's what I'm looking at. So if your first name starts with A through E, you chat to Whip Roy. F through K, chat to Whip Paul. L through R, chat to Whip Dave. And S through Z, chat to Whip Marley. They are in the chat there for you. So if you'd like to make a speech, send a message to your assigned whip. Tell them whether you want to speak in affirmative or negative, because again, we alternate, so we need to know that. You do have to pick a side. You can have as much nuance as you want, but you have to pick a side. And then each one will be, after that, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Pick a side, tell your whip, and then we will try to fit in as many speeches as we can. We start with 4 minutes, but we may reduce that depending on how many people are in the queue, so we can get as many speeches as possible. Again, those will be followed by the questions of curiosity. And when you have 30 seconds left, I will gently interrupt you. Sorry that I have to use my voice and talk over you on the Zoom medium. That will be your warning that you have 30 seconds and you have to wrap it up. We will end the debate no later than 9:45 Eastern, 6:45 Pacific, and then we will do a short debrief where we want to know what you thought. So you don't have to use all of your time. Just say what you want to say. You can yield your time back. You don't have to have a prepared speech, as I mentioned. Some of our very best speeches come from people who are just thinking through what they want to say, what they believe, right there on the Zoom screen. So that is all for our rules and explanation. Before we get started, we do have one more ritual to remind all of you of the creed that animates all we do here, including our debates, the Braver Angels Way. Paul, take it away.
So we state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. We look for common ground where it exists, and if possible, find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. And in Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently.
Thank you so much, Paul. This jazz hands that I'm giving Paul right now, you can give this to say thank you to a speaker or well done to a speaker afterward, whether you agree or disagree. So now, without further ado, the resolution on the table tonight is resolved. The U.S. should prioritize domestic interests over international leadership. Resolved, the U.S. should prioritize domestic interests over international leadership. With that, I call this debate to order, and I am looking for my first speech in the affirmative. For that, let's go to Suzanne. Suzanne, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure that the U.S. has been providing international leadership for years. We have threatened, bribed, and cajoled other countries to work with us, but how often are we creating mutually beneficial outcomes? Isn't that the kind of leadership that inspires and attracts? But first, we need to create those dynamics here at home. We need the government and institutions to rebuild trust and efficacy with our citizens before we attempt to export programs, goodwill, and leadership to the world. We need to model the outcomes so that others want to follow. There are many divisive policies that have been harming our citizens: the lockdowns, loss of medical freedom, censorship, illegal migration, DEI initiatives, and destabilizing our currency through reckless spending and money printing. I'll highlight a few. The Biden administration allowed millions of unvetted illegal migrants to enter our country and even provided transportation to disperse them around the U.S. The migrants received preferential treatment over legitimate U.S. citizens with financial gifts and housing. For example, the State Department provided millions of dollars in cash to house illegal migrants in luxury hotels in New York City. Oops, I'm sorry, I misread. Okay. For example, the State Department provided millions of dollars in cash disbursements for migrants at our southern border, and $59 million was spent in 1 week to house illegal migrants in luxury hotels in New York City. There's also been a lack of effective prosecution for violating laws from shoplifting to violent crimes, including attacking and beating police officers and the rape and murder of U.S. citizens. Another area of concern is the way DEI programs use race, gender, and sexual orientation to provide preferential treatment by substituting one version of discrimination for another. Individuals should be assessed based on their merit, skills, and experience in performing their job. Regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation, I want my pilot, or brain surgeon, or police officer to have proper training and qualifications. And we need to know what is actually happening in our communities, countries, and world. We need unbiased and credible reporting of the facts so that we can form our opinions. We need to be able to hear dissenting voices and have the ability to investigate alternatives to the uniform narrative provided by mainstream media. We've been fed a diet of panic and fear to facilitate indoctrination with messaging from safe and effective to mostly peaceful protests, even as the coverage showed cities on fire, looting, people wielding weapons of all kinds, and police and citizens being attacked. Fortunately, there are still those who report the facts without bias in their news coverage. For example, I've been reading and listening to the Epoch Times for 5 years now and have yet to find a single story which reveals the journalist's perspective. It's very refreshing. And there are others. Our country has many trillions of dollars of debt, and we are facing huge challenges to our national solvency. Even so, we have been spending millions of dollars on programs like providing condoms to the Taliban, providing money for being LGBTQ in the Caribbean, and helping Tunisian migrants readjust to life in Tunisia after deportation. Why? Before we can lead and inspire other countries to want to follow, we must
30 seconds, Suzanne.
We must first address issues in our own country which compromise access to the American dream. That is what has attracted generations of people to the U.S. because we represent freedom, hope, and opportunity. We must lead by example and model the freedoms we wish to share with the world. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. Perfect time. All right. If you have first of all, if that speech inspired you and you have something more than a question of curiosity, I invite anyone to go and reach out to a whip to get in the queue to speak, whether in the affirmative or negative. But now I will take a few questions of curiosity for our speaker. Address them to me. Raise your Zoom hand if you have a question of curiosity. No questions for our speaker.
There are questions.
Wait, sorry, I'm not, why am I not seeing them?
I see Anne and Michael and Grace.
I usually see, in that case, let's go
Yes.
to Anne.
Anne, you're on mute.
Please, unmute yourself.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would like to ask the, Madam Chair, I would like to ask the Speaker to elucidate a little bit the comments about the mainstream media being not truthful. It is clear that we all get our news from someplace. And you did mention something, and I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, I catch the name, but things like, we're spending money on condoms for the Taliban, some of the other types of things. I am wondering, besides the source that you mentioned, could you name two other?
The speaker.
Okay, besides, Madam Speaker, could you ask the Speaker, Madam Chair, could you ask the Speaker to name two other sources that she gets her news from?
Other sources to our speaker.
Well, those particular things you referenced are both from the DOGE reports that are directly from the State Department and USAID budgets. So that's where those came from.
Okay. And I don't know why I wasn't seeing hands before, but I do see them now. So let's go to Michael Abramson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although I agree with much of what speaker said, but I am wondering even if we agree with the goals of our current administration, does the speaker believe that some of specific actions actually hurt our reputation in the world and our ability to project American values, or do they help? So that's my question. Thank you.
To our speaker.
That's a big question. There's several big questions. I think that it's important to consider what we are actually putting out in the world. And again, I'm going to just reference people back to checking the DOGE reports of what kinds of programs we've been funding through USAID, for example, and the State Department. Those are just two of them. And whether those programs reflect the values that we want to project and think it is our right to project to the world. I think that, I found it very surprising. I think that anyone with a beating heart and compassion wants to help others in the world. And I think that I had always believed that the US leadership in the world was about compassion and helping. And I have been learning a lot over the last years, and I question whether we are doing the good we think we're doing versus self-interest that maybe don't even serve us as citizens, that serve certain people who have found ways to get programs in place that actually are self-enriching. I mean, there's so much waste and fraud, and I think that we have to really take a serious look at cutting things back to where we can start with integrity.
Yeah. And we'll go to one more question on this. Let's go to Grace.
Madam Chair, I'd like to know if the speaker, so the speaker said that she wants to focus on like reforming our current country before helping others. I want to know if the speaker um, would want to spend any money on humanitarian aid and assistance currently right now to the many war-torn or poor areas of the world.
To our speaker.
That's John, there's too much feedback. Sorry, that's my other room. I think that there are so many programs that we believe with our hearts are really well intentioned, and the execution is not as we would hope. And I think there needs to be a lot of review about the programs and what they're actually doing, because there's so many situations that I have learned about that I was surprised and very disappointed, because I support a lot of organizations, and I've been really been very carefully screening now what the scope of those organizations are and what they're actually doing in other countries. But I totally believe that we all do what we can to help the world, ourselves, our communities, and our world.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. We will now go to our first speech in the negative. So Patsy Wood, you have 4 minutes. Do we have Patsy?
Needs to unmute.
She's muted.
Beautiful. All right. So I'm going to speak in the negative. While the U.S. has, hundreds of bases and defensive operations around the world, which are maintained at considerable expense, and while some strategic cutback, I believe, is necessary, I'm concerned that any significant cutbacks could put our country at risk militarily and economically. Whether we like it or not, the U.S. has bases that are present in all global regions: Europe, Asia, Middle East, Latin and South America, and the Arctic. And I feel that a dramatic U.S. pullout from any of these regions could seriously undermine the current balance of power and also put us at domestic risk. So consider Europe. The war in Ukraine likely to be settled with Russia annexing eastern Ukraine and Crimea. It would seem that that would be the end of it, and we could just let Europe be Europe. Unfortunately, there's a strong potential for Putin to not stop there and to continue to expand Russia's borders into Europe. The U.S. is the largest military power in the world, and it is the only NATO country powerful enough to maintain the post-war status quo from further Russian invasion, creating a balance of power in Europe. If we pull out, we create a vacuum that I'm afraid Putin will be glad to fill. Why does Trump want Greenland? The Arctic region is fast becoming a global hotspot as the sea waters warm, opening up trade routes for much of the year with icebreaker help. These routes are much more efficient than southern routes. This is strategic for China, Russia, the US, Canada, many powers. So the Arctic is fast becoming a highly contested region, and Russia already has considerable bases there that assure its current dominance. Premier Xi of China has assured us that he will solve the Taiwan situation by 2027. A Chinese invasion is likely, and here I hope the US does not get involved, but again, if China wins that war, it is likely the US trade routes in the South China Sea will be compromised, which can disrupt our trade with China, Japan, Southeast Asia, Australia, South Korea, and even embolden Northern Korea to move on South Korea. The Middle East obviously is a constant source of turmoil, and US defensive operations are centered there, defending Israel, which is surrounded by many hostile forces, including significant powers like Iran. Again, the adjacent Suez Canal is a critical trade route for the US that's constantly under attack. Finally, South America and Latin America are areas critical for the US to defend. Why does Trump want the Panama Canal? Simple. It's a major trade route, and it assures that the US has more stability and security in our Western Hemisphere. We can't afford to have China and other potential adversaries settled comfortably so close to our borders. So while it would be ideal for the US to pull way back from global military operations, As the #1 military power, we have to have a military presence in order to balance power with our adversaries. Peace is an active process, and it involves strategic defensive operations that cost money. Also, our economy is a global one that depends on our ready access to stable and efficient trade routes. If we lose access to these routes by significant pullouts from any or all of these regions, our economy and citizens will suffer. With the looming threat of incursion from Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, we have to maintain significant defensive operations around the world and to maintain our military presence, even if this undermines our ability to fully address all the domestic issues that we so need to. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. If you'd like to get on deck, reach out to your whip if you'd like to give a speech. But now we will go to questions for our speaker, questions of curiosity. And I do seem to be having some trouble. Natalie, can you see? No? Okay. Wasn't sure.
No
Hang
hands.
on, hang on. No hands? Let's go to Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am curious about the speaker's thoughts as to what motivates the other powers that we may want to maintain a presence against, and whether their own domestic issues may play a role in that.
Well, I do think always their domestic issues play a role, for sure. China and Russia are struggling with a number of different issues, but they also have created an alliance in the last number of years. And we know that the oil and gas Russia is providing to China, China's providing technical know-how to Russia. So that alliance is strengthening. And I mean, these things they don't stay the same. They just, it's a constantly dynamic situation. So while I do think that there will be domestic issues both of these countries and potential adversaries, real adversaries, are dealing with, I think we also have to stay on top of it by maintaining our defensive operations. I wish we could cut back. Honestly, I do. But I just worry that there's too many precarious situations right now in the world.
Let's go for another question to Anne.
Yes, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, my question for the speaker is whether or not he would like to address the concept of soft power, of how we interact through humanitarian aid, for example, in Africa, where
Good question.
Okay.
yeah.
That's a great question. And, I think soft power is critically important. More so, it's maybe even more powerful in some ways than military operations, but we need military as well. I think that the work that USAID was doing, in many cases, now there's certainly exceptions to that, but it was a lot of good work. It was creating goodwill in the world towards the United States. So I do believe that those kinds of operations can be really important in also improving our security at home.
Thank you to our speaker and our questioners. Just making sure I'm not missing any hands because my Zoom is flaky. Okay, seeing none, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. I am now looking for another speech in the affirmative. And for that, I have Ron McFarland. Ron, you have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm better known as Sugar Bear. And I look at this resolve not as domestic or international, but I look at it as populism versus globalism. I remember as a child growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my father worked 3 jobs. He drove a cab, he worked part-time at a meat packing place, and he labored selling peanuts and popcorn at Crosby Field. Boy, he was tired when he would get home. My mom stretched the budget for us to eat. At the dinner table, my dad once said to me, he said, son, watch out for the 5 Ps, the pundits, the professors, the professionals, and the politicians. They all talk in sync, and they send our money abroad, and our streets are crumbling. Our education system is horrible. And here I was in a segregated projects, and I was like, he's right. He's on something. And that was the first time I realized about populism versus globalism. And I've always, even before Trump, was a populist, conservative. Now, of course, my dad was a Democrat. He said, well, as long as they're giving me the money, I'll take it. But the thing is, let us not let populism become a synonym for rage, nor globalism a license for arrogance, because we tend to get in our tribal place, conservatives for populism and liberals for globalism in our tribal place, and we defend it. And I say with this formula, let us come together as true Americans with a common ground solution. Even though I'm for populism, I really want us to come together and have a meeting of the minds and try to solve this. Now, let's start rebuilding the American families. Let's also secure our borders, but also let us do it in a place where we are helping people. And that's the sole thing, is come together, find a solution where we can all have common ground. And I call that, I give it, and every time when I get into a debate, which I'm a rookie, I give an algebraic equation. A, anchored patriotism, a principle of love of country that protects its citizens. B, belonging before branding. That means seeing people as neighbors and not political tribes. C, civic trust. That means come together and have the oxygen of having a great democracy. And that equals common ground. I say, ladies and gentlemen, let's put on our hats, our Braver Angels hats, and let's speak, not in a tone of just us, but we, with a heart of champions. That is it for Sugar Bear.
Thank you to our speaker. And with that, we will go to questions of curiosity. Let's go to Celeste. Did Celeste just put her hand down? Okay, let's go, if not Celeste, then to Al in Connecticut.
Yes, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I'm sorry. I'd like to ask the speaker, I agree with what he says, but how do we come together when we're divided in this country in so many ways? We're divided in politics where nothing gets done. We're divided in the media where you hear what you want to hear. We're divided across campuses and on and on and on through our institutions. Is it possible to come together?
Yes, it is. Just like the hat that I'm wearing. And it says, and it gives the quote of Lincoln, we're not enemies. We're Americans. So if it's totally in your heart, if you believe that, then first of all, what's the first thing we learned in Braver Angels? We need to listen about 95% of the time. I know the survey says 70%, but listen before we jump to conclusions. And then have empathy for the other side. And I try to do that in every chance I meet with someone that I disagree with. That is one way. And also, I would say as a Christian, I have the mindset of Jesus Christ. I love both sides. That doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I love them and I want to come up with a solution so we can help this country. So we have to help the country first before we can go abroad and help people internationally. That's what I believe.
Let's go now to Jay Nyberg.
Madam Chair, would you please ask the speaker to clarify the 5 Ps? I believe he mentioned 4 of them. And since they are so wonderful, I would like to hear all 5 of them.
Yeah, I had a senior moment there for a minute. I'll be honest. Okay, pundit, and what the pundits, you know what a pundit is. They all work in sync. You can go on CNN, Fox News, wherever you want, whoever side and they all work in sync and saying the narrative. So you got the pundit, you got the professor, okay, and of a university. And then you also have the professional, which could be actors, sports people, that sort of thing. And then you have preachers, and I don't know how many preachers I've heard. They're ambulance chasers, kind of like type preachers. And did I leave out another? Oh, the politician. They're the politician, and I learned that, and I was 10 years old. Can you believe that? And then I'm sitting and watching TV, and I hear it. So anyway, that's what the 5 Ps for me are. Mark. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not the moderator.
Let's go to Mark.
I forgot I'm not moderating.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the speaker would be satisfied if a U.S. administration told the public, would it be satisfactory if it told the public that it was prioritizing domestic interests, and in the background, it also competently offered international leadership?
Well, okay. I think a person can do both, but I think you should pronounce your objective softly before you go the other side. So domestically, and the reason why I say this, and I don't want to hurt the last administration, talk down about the last administration, but we're in such dire straits that we have to concentrate on domestic issues first. We're just in a place right now where leadership across abroad has to take up the slack until we can solve some of the problems that we have domestically. And I think it would be better that way. And I hope I answered your question or give you a reason why I think we can go domestically with the idea of once we're strong, that makes the world stronger. Yes.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. I do see the other hands up. We'll limit questions for each speaker, though I am taking note of who I haven't called on, so keep raising your hands. Let's go now for our next speech in the negative to Grace. Grace J.
Hi, everyone. So I chose to speak in the negative because I want to talk about the importance of international leadership, but technically I do agree with the affirmative of this, where I do think we should prioritize domestic interests over international leadership. Like the majority of our tax dollars should be going towards domestic things and not international things. But right now, our international leadership has been greatly decreased, and I think this is hugely alarming. Specifically, I want to focus on the U.S. funding for humanitarian aid programs, the majority of which goes through USAID, which has been fiercely attacked and shut down by the Trump administration. USAID counts for about 0.5% of the U.S. budget, so a very, very small percent of all of the money that we're spending, and it's crucial for the health of people around the world in fighting our deadliest diseases, especially in poor countries where they are unable to fund those programs and treatments through their own government's money or through humanitarian aid from individuals is just not enough to make up the gap in what the U.S. has been funding. And the dramatic stop in these treatments is going to cause many, many people to die around the world, including many people that have already died. And the programs that are to count how many people have died of like diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS, are also run by USAID. So we won't actually get an accurate estimate of how many people are going to be affected by this. And not only does it affect people in these poor countries, it affects us as well, because as we've seen with the spread of COVID, that diseases don't pay attention to borders. So if we have right now with the shutdown of USAID, have a shutdown in tuberculosis treatment for people who were getting drugs through these programs, and they get a worse resistant version of tuberculosis, then that worse version of tuberculosis that could be resistant to more drugs may spread to the United States and affect us as well in our richer country. So these diseases are horrible, and we really should care as humans for caring for the least of us in the world. And the United States government really needs to play a role in this, or else we're just not going to have the kind of progress that we've been having over the past many years in helping to decrease the burden of these of the worst diseases in the world. So that's my primary concern with international development in the international leadership. But I think, you know, it causes a great deal of goodwill in these countries where we're competing with China to have, you know, the best and the brightest people there coming to our country or coming to other countries from some of these third world countries. And if we're there and we've saved many people's lives, that's really, you know, helpful for helping spread the goodwill of the United States around the world as well. I think that's all I had to say. So thank you.
Hey, thank you to our speaker. Let's go to Kit for a question of curiosity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have I have a question of clarification. I
Indeed.
thought I understood the speaker to say that the USAID budget was about 5% of the US overall
0.5.
budget. 0.5, okay, and I thought it was actually even lower than that.
It might be lower than that. I know it's not more than 0.5.
Okay, thank you for
Yeah,
the
sorry. I don't know all the exact numbers, but I
Thank
knew
you.
it was less than 0.5%. Yeah.
Let's go now to Sam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker is I would like to know how the speaker's view is impacted by the knowledge that the USAID program is not a front, but involves espionage in some of our intelligence operations. Does the knowledge of that part of USAID's function strengthen or undermine the argument the speaker made?
I think that, I mean, obviously that doesn't, like, the goodwill part, right, is impacted by that, right? If you've got, like, it's obvious that CIA is operating in these programs. But in terms of saving people's lives, I mean, that's going to happen whether or not we have espionage involved or not. So I don't think it changes my argument significantly, because I think it's worth it to save these people's lives, whether or not there's espionage involved in some of the programs.
Let's go to Karen.
Hey, this is the first time I've ever commented. So, Lady Chair, thank you for the opportunity. And I am curious about, you know, if the United States and the governmental policies would address domestic concerns, including tariffs from international countries, the needs of our veterans, and if they were better served, and could crime go down? And even in immigration, you know, if a path forward could be found for folks, which I consider humanitarian, I'm just wondering if it would benefit the
Benefit.
United States. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
I was a little confused, but I think that Karen was asking if it would benefit the United States to focus on domestic things, that could help crime go down. I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of things we can do in our country to help, our economy and to help crime go down. And I don't think that's mutually exclusive with foreign aid. The WIP has helpfully looked up the statistics for me, and EAID was 0.3% of all federal spending last year. To clarify that.
And with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. So now I am looking for another speech in the negative. And for that, let's go to Maxwell Massa. Maxwell, you have 4 minutes.
Hello, hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. You wish me to, so I will be speaking in the negative that we should not prioritize domestic interests.
That we have you, I'm sorry, we have the affirmative. I apologize.
Okay, that was okay. Yeah, that was okay. Forgive me. I was a little confused. That was what I thought. Yes, I believe that we should prioritize domestic interests over our international leadership. For the very basic reason that you cannot have so history shows that you cannot have effective international leadership without dealing with basically domestic issues first. I know that I'm going to be that guy and start talking about the Renaissance, but get ready for that. One of the problems that I believe you had with Florence was, as time went by, Florentines themselves started doing less and less and less, and they began relying more and more and more basically on contracting. And all that they became was a giant pile of money with no real skills or power of its own. And when all that you have left is the money, you remain internationally desirable, but you are not providing international leadership because there's very little that you personally can do. And this is, in my mind, this is a very important problem for America, in particular, in the fourth industrial revolution, which we find ourselves in the midst of, and the need to figure out how to transform our training and our education for the rising generation of the young, so that they will be able to compete in a world market that is going to be transformed by AI, transformed by advances of which I have never heard. And that will doubtless boggle the world when they come out. I was reading about computers that actually use human neurons about a week ago. These issues are all very important, and if we do not focus on our domestic needs, we will not be prepared as Americans to provide the leadership that the world does need. But the domestic priorities have to come first. The education and the education, the preparation of the young is of central interest to me. I agree that America should lead, but it cannot lead if domestic issues are not prioritized.
Thank you to our speaker. With that, we'll go to questions of curiosity. Let's go to Michael Snare.
I'd like to ask the speaker if he believes that our involvement in international initiatives delivers any domestic benefits.
I believe that it does definitely deliver domestic benefits. Of course it does. However, I believe our ability to remain relevant as anything other than a pile of cash in those international international affairs is predicated upon our ability to actually properly train, educate, and field in a new generation of young people who will be prepared for that task. We have in some ways a problem with basically a lot of our leadership gradually aging, and the youth coming up behind them not being completely prepared to take on the role take on the mantle of leadership that that basically people who are boomers and maybe some old the older group in Gen X have basically prepared for them. I do agree that involvement in international affairs does provide benefits to Americans. I'm concerned about our ability to sustain that involvement. And I really want to make sure that we are able to do that. And so for that reason, domestic matters do have to have, in my mind, a priority.
Let's go to Daniel for a question of curiosity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly agree with the speaker's main premise that we cannot be effective leaders if we don't have our domestic affairs in order. And I'm curious if the speaker believes that the converse is also true. That is, whether if we do not sufficiently protect American interests at the international level, if we are still going to be able to, do what we'd like to for our citizens.
Well, okay, thank you. That's a very fair question. So I would point out that if you do not have, like, basically your domestic affairs in order in the manner that I described, your involvement in international affairs will ultimately begin to drag you down. I would like to point to the Iraq War as a critical example of American involvement in international affairs in a manner that I do not think really provided a lot of great benefit to the populace. That came out of, in my mind, basically a failure domestically to prepare to face the world. I believe on Iraq we managed to spend about $1 trillion. That was money that could have. Again, if you consider America, you want America to be a leader on the international scene, there's a lot better things to do with $1 trillion, I think, than what wound up getting done with it. I do agree that there are ways in which we could benefit, but the potential to mess it up royally and to ultimately cause great cost is too great to ignore.
Let's go to the previous speaker, Ron, who has not yet asked a question.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would like to ask the speaker does populism have its own version of Renaissance artists, creators, thinkers, driving the movement through a story or art? Because I like when you, okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no. The answer is yes. Here, I'll actually. I know of at least. I know there was the. I think it was called the. And I'm typing names in the chat. There were people who were part of essentially the populist element. And there was a republic. That did try to embrace essentially populist values. The Renaissance, however, was in many ways, in my mind, mainly oligarchy, but it was small competitive oligarchy.
Okay. Yeah.
It is important to remember that the Renaissance is in many ways good and interesting and positive, but mainly because it is a step forward out of the Dark Ages. It is not quite yet modern. Really, in my mind, its value and its importance is only really understood as a change.
Okay, and with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked.
Thank you so much.
So we now are looking for, let me make sure I'm not mixing up my F's and eggs, as I do sometimes do. We are going back to the negative, and our next speaker will be Michael Snare. Michael, you have 4 minutes.
Am I still on? Let's see, I gotta check my minute. Okay, no, I'm not on mute. I believe very strongly that our international engagement and efforts pays very large domestic benefits, and that we shouldn't be thinking as much about prioritizing domestic versus international as thinking about what benefits us the most. When we talk about our international leadership, our allies make us much stronger. Think about how much more frightening the world would be today if China had spent the last 20 years building alliances in Asia instead of pushing the Asian nations around the way our current administration seems to be taking us. It's going to cost us our allies. It's going to cost us our alliances. Many nations sent troops to fight with us in Afghanistan. That's the only invocation to date of NATO's self-defense provisions. The Danes in particular, on a per capita basis, the Danish troops took as many casualties as the US did. Those were Danes who died helping us in Afghanistan, that American lives, were saved because the Danish were helping. UK, Canada, France, many others as well, sent troops. As far as our other engagement, USAID, for example, for a tiny amount of money, we get a great deal of soft power. Some mention has been made about some of the things that DOGE has reported that have, frankly been proved to be, kind of not really accurate. And Musk himself has sort of said, well, you can't expect everything we say to be true. And that is a literal quote. Condoms for the Taliban. Not in the last 3 years, but in the past, we sent money. We spent about $100 million in Afghanistan on reproductive health. And that include clinics, for maternity care and contraceptives and distribution of some condoms. But it was a long time ago, and it wasn't, condoms for the Taliban. If we look at the other things that are being cut, Voice of America, for example, now, which has broadcast accurate news, behind the Iron Curtain, into China, into areas where the media are controlled by the government, and that's gone off the air. And the broadcast stations that carried that are replacing Voice of America with news feeds coming from Russia and China. And gosh, I don't think those are going to be very beneficial for us. We just got we get so much benefit from this, from having help.
30 seconds, Mike.
Yeah, we're in a bar fight, and we're the toughest guys in the bar, no doubt about it. But it's good to have people watching your back. It's good to have friends. We're weaker militarily, economically, in every way. We are weaker without the friends.
Okay. With that, our speaker is thanked, and we will now take questions of curiosity. Let's go to Michael Lambert.
Madam Speaker, I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I agree with the speaker quite a bit of what he was saying. I wanted to ask him if he would comment on some of the issues domestically that seem to be also populist issues, probably left populist issues, like wealth redistribution, stronger labor rights, maybe even government intervention in the economy. What are your thoughts? I wonder if you would, I'm sorry, yes, Madam Speaker, would you ask him his thoughts on those?
To our speaker.
I'm not a big fan of government intervention in the economy. I'm a fairly big fan of labor, organized labor. I think the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems.
He said what, to get out of NATO or to be in NATO?
Has been the fact that we've allowed globalization of trade to primarily benefit investors, people with money, which is nothing wrong with that. Businesses should make money, but we've not figured out a way to distribute enough of that economic benefit to the working class, and they're struggling. It's tough these days.
Let's go to Steve.
Yes, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, it seems like the speaker has studied the issue quite a bit. And I have a general question for him. Does the speaker think that at any time during the country's history, we have not prioritized domestic issues and domestic interest over international interest. It seems to me that everything that the country has always done was to advance, its own personal, its own specific interest. So I'm curious about the speaker's thought about that.
Wow, that's a tough question. In general, I think our domestic interests are very much tied in with what's good for the rest of the world. We've done some things that were pretty selfish, however, and we've certainly made some pretty bad mistakes that have, caused, tremendous amount of bloodshed and grief in the world. So I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question, but it's the best I've got.
And for one more question, Celeste, let's go to new speaker Celeste, or new questioner.
Hey, I'm probably of the same opinion as you, but
Well,
I am
You
processing.
don't have my opinion. I haven't given a
No, I meant, Madam Speaker, to the speaker, or Madam Chair, to the speaker, I'm probably of the same opinion as you, but I have been studying the Bannon and his idea of the Pacific Zone in order to get out of NATO, and realigning to balkanize, I guess, protection spaces. This is like probably from like before we had NATO. He's like going way back, and he's an America First person. And so my question is, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the
You're not wondering my thoughts.
I'm wondering what the speaker's thoughts are on the recent Houthi strike that they performed in the Red Sea and I can't remember the Al-Bayed or whatever the place, the shipping lanes, and that they had a definitive strike in the way that they prosecuted Afghanistan, going after heads, with collateral damage, and lots of money from America to protect our interests, and being aligned with Saudi Arabia. So
question is, what does the speaker think about that?
Yeah, the money spent there, it was in alignment with our domestic interests on oil, and like, even though we want to concentrate on stuff at home.
Okay.
Mhm. Well, I think that enforcement of free travel through the Red Sea is very important, but I don't think we're going to achieve that. The Saudis have been bombing the Houthis for a decade, and we may be a little better at it than they were, but it's not a fight we're going to win, much as I wish we could.
On that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. I am now going to a speech in the affirmative. And let's see. Let's go to Daniel. Daniel, am I saying Zdeblik correctly?
Yes, but I'm in the negative.
You're in the negative. I see. I apologize for that. Okay. Then let's go to Marley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to come on here and talk about specifically the importance of, I think something that a lot of speakers previously have mentioned is that it is important for the U.S. to be a strong leader and to lead by example. And I believe that it's important to lead by both example and by action. And I certainly think that we can't just stop sending aid to countries that need it to, keep their citizens alive or to war-torn zones. But I do think that it is important to prioritize healing some of the damage that our country has experienced in terms of their own system, its own systems, and its own policies and politics. The country is certainly not in a position right now, it seems, to be seen as a role model for the world. We have seen several times in recent years other nations not really taking the U.S. seriously in a lot of ways, and I think that goes to show that we are not in a position to be telling everyone else how to live when we're still trying to figure that out ourselves. So that's why I believe that we should be prioritizing personal interests. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. Let's go to questions. Questions of curiosity for our speaker. Let's go to Anne. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Madam Chair, I have a question for the speaker, and that has to do with, okay, if America is not going to be a leader because we have our own problems and we're messed up, who do you suggest should be the leader?
I have my own suggestions, but
who does the speaker put forth as somebody who should lead the world, if not the US?
Thank you. To our speaker.
That's a very good question, and one that I don't know if I can easily answer. I think that in reality, I really don't think there is a single country that you could point at and say this country is perfect and they are the role model for the world. I mean, I think most people will agree to that. I think that really what it has to come down to is a combination of a coalition of a lot of countries that are all setting strong examples in their own ways and are really, when it comes down to it, showing what it looks like to be working together and trying to promote a better environment for the world. And we see this in a lot of ways with the UN and different things like that. But I suppose I think that the countries still shouldn't, I guess, forget about their own domestic interests in the process.
Let's go to Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Chair, would you please ask the speaker, since international agreements will be made on trade, health, technology, environment, conflict resolution, nuclear, biological weapons, etc., with or without us, won't the decisions be less likely to be in our domestic interests if we don't play a role on the international leadership, if we don't play an international leadership role?
Good question. And I think in large part, I agree that it certainly can be risky when we are not a part of those decisions. And I guess what I am suggesting is, and what I believe is less of a full pull out of all of these international agreements and organizations, and more of a larger discourse shift from only focusing on, or not that we do only focus, but trying to shift the discourse to be towards how can we improve the quality of life here in the US, which is something that desperately needs to be improved for a lot of people. And so it's less of like remove ourselves from all international decision making and more of change what we're prioritizing, if that makes sense.
And for one more question, let's go to Laura.
Okay. Hang on just a moment here. Madam Chair, does the speaker believe that as the richest nation in the world, our international spending is the primary thing interfering with our investment in the quality of our citizens' lives?
Well, to be completely honest, I am not an economist and I don't have a full breadth of knowledge into where everything that we're spending is going. But I have I think an understanding that's pretty on par with the majority of the citizens of the country. And from my relatively limited understanding, I believe that in some ways it is. I remember one of the speakers previously mentioned like $1 trillion that was spent in, I believe it was Iraq, but I could be incorrect about that. But a lot of money spent in certain things that are definitely ending up as wastes and prove in the long run to be inefficient uses of our money. And so in those ways, I think yes. But I almost believe that it's less of the amount of the money, because we are the richest nation in the world, and although we do have money issues, we still have a lot of money to be spending. I think it's less about money and more about the capacity to solve issues that our lawmakers have, because there is only a limited number of time in sessions for legislators, and they really cannot get that much done. And when they spend so much time focusing on certain issues, then others will inevitably get neglected. So I think it's more about the time spent on things than just the money.
With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. Now we return to the negative. Let's go back to Daniel. Apologies for the mistake before. Negative speech, 4 minutes.
No problem, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'd like to thank some of the previous speakers because a lot of what I had been thinking about saying they've already talked about. So in particular, the last speaker in the negative, I think really introduced the point that when we think about prioritizing sending dollars to causes at home or dollars abroad, it shouldn't be, at least in my opinion, it shouldn't be, do we care more about our own citizens or about citizens somewhere else? I think our Constitution is very clear. Our government is in place to protect us, and that might sound selfish, but I think it's the system we have, and we should accept that. That the ultimate, we are the customers. We are the ones who us as American citizens are saying this is what our government should be doing. But I think, as the previous speaker pointed out in the negative, there are a ton of benefits that we get at home from being good leaders abroad. And I'd also like to say, and I mostly I wanted to talk about what some of those things were, but I quickly wanted to say one thing that the previous speaker in the positive said that I really agreed with, having to do with, I guess maybe a way I thought of saying it is, being the leader of the free world shouldn't mean being the dictator of the free world. It should mean we work with our allies to move the world in a better direction while looking out for our own interests. And so I don't want this to sound like too much of a laundry list, especially because some of these things have come up already, but I just wanted to talk about some of the concrete ways in which being an international leader and shaping things that are happening elsewhere in the world can concretely benefit us at home. I wrote down a list of some bad things that we can help prevent abroad that come back to us. Some of them have already been mentioned, that disease does not respect borders. So if we prevent diseases abroad, that helps us here at home. War, if we can prevent that or confine wars from spreading abroad, that will then they will not impact us here at home. Financial crises, we have kind of a global economy for better or worse, and so if there's a financial crisis in Europe, it'll affect us here. And also terrorism. Terrorists come from all over the world. And so if there's a lot of terrorist activity in someplace anywhere in the world, they might decide that America would be a good target for their activities. And so unfortunately, that concerns us as well. And then on the good side, if we are good at being international leaders, we get to engage more with trade with our allies and our friends, which benefits our economy. Having allies can look out for us in a lot of situations. The previous speaker in the pro already talked about how having allies on the battlefield is incredibly important. And there's a number of other ways. And also just sharing intelligence is one of those ways. That having, we have one of the biggest intelligence networks, but it's bigger because we have allies that share intelligence with us. And I just had two other thoughts before yielding my time back, which is that one of the things that we often talk about wanting to spread for its own intrinsic sake is spreading American values. And I want to say that, again, we shouldn't be doing that for its own intrinsic value. We should be doing it because it helps us as Americans. But it does help us as Americans because other countries that share our values with us are more likely to trade with us, to be our allies, and to not go to war with other democratic countries. That's a very well-established fact that democracies tend not to go to war with each other. And finally, in terms of the last question of, like for a given, the question of the debate is about priorities. And so thinking about it in terms of, we have this dollar and, should we send it to somebody at home or should we send it to somebody in another country? And I just wanted to make it a case in terms of the urgency of where that dollar is needed. So you might say that dollar is urgently needed here at home because somebody is suffering somewhere. And if we give them that dollar, we can give it to them now and they will immediately suffer less. But the case for certain international cases is if we send our money to somewhere that needs it, thank you, like Ukraine, we can prevent another country from collapsing. And that is something that can't be undone. And so there's an urgency there as well to prevent things from happening that can't be undone. And I should have mentioned at the top, maybe I have a personal connection to that as well. I'm a Ukrainian American, and so I've done a lot of time since the full-scale invasion thinking about how communicating these ideas. So thank you, and I'll yield back my time.
Thank you to our speaker. Let's go to Terry for a question of curiosity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker a question since he is a Ukrainian American. What do you think the prospects of Ukraine?
You want the speaker's opinion,
what does the speaker think of the prospects of Ukraine right now with the current alignment of the United States with Russia?
Yeah, I'm not too optimistic about it, but I don't know. I guess I'll honestly say I did not vote for President Trump because, and this was my main reason why, because I feared that he would not do what I hoped he would do in Ukraine, and so far, nothing that I've seen has changed that belief. But I still have hope. I still have hope that you know, there have been things that have been proposed, like the mineral deal, which I think could work really well, and I think there's there's elements there that could produce a better outcome. But yeah, so far, yeah.
Okay, let's go to Michael Abramson.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the speaker mentioned several times that we have to work with our allies. We cannot lead the world alone, and I agree with this. But my question is that I worry about our current administration maybe choosing the wrong allies and not cherishing the relationships with our closest allies, like the Western European and Eastern European countries and Canada. What does speaker think about this? And Ukraine, of course, it's the worst example of this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say I think I guess one of the benefits that I listed for how international leadership can benefit us at home is trade. That when we have allies that share our values, we trade with them, and that makes things cheaper. It produces wealth for both parties. And I understand the complaint of the current administration and people who look at trade deals and say that they're benefiting from them more than us, or because we're trading, we're not protecting our own domestic economy. But I think the benefit of having allies is that you can work that out without sort of removing all of the benefits that come with having free trade. And I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll see what resolution there is to this quote unquote trade war. But yeah, I would agree with you. At least in the current moment, it seems like we are not getting that advantage of having our allies in having free trade with them when we could.
And for one final question for this speaker, let's go to our opening speaker, Suzanne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could you please, no, Madam Chair, could you please ask the speaker? I have two quick questions. One is, you mentioned that you think— I
didn't mention.
that the speaker mentioned that he thought that it was very important that we share our values, our American values. And I wondered if he could briefly delineate what he believes those are. And then the second one is related to, you mentioned that with the administration coming in, that he mentioned that with the administration coming in, that that the response was not what he had hoped. And I wondered if he could tell us a little bit about what he had hoped might be an appropriate response to try to wind up the war and have a healing, have things move forward. Thank you.
American views and hopes. Thank you.
I'm grateful for the questions. The first one, I guess, I'm sure many people mean different things when they talk about exporting American values. To be concrete, the thing that I was thinking about most specifically is our democratic form of government. And the result I was referencing is that countries that have a well-established democratic tradition tend not to go to war with each other. So that was mostly what I had in mind, but I'm sure other people mean other things when they say that. And then in terms of what I had hoped would happen with respect to the war in Ukraine, I think so. My main problem with the administration's messaging is not suggesting that a ceasefire would be a good idea, but there's been a level of urgency to get a ceasefire, and of course everyone wants wants peace in the area as soon as possible, and nobody more so than the Ukrainians. But the problem that I see with the administration's strategy is that coming with this level of urgency is very bad for negotiations. So I think like if I'm going to buy a car, I don't want to make it seem like I need to buy the car in 10 minutes and then I have to hit the road. I want to make it seem like I can spend a long time going through negotiations just to get a better value for the car. And I think that logic applies to any negotiations involving Ukraine and Russia. What I would have liked to see is, having a peace plan on the table. I think actually the initial peace plan that Keith Kellogg had was reasonable in the sense that it could work as a ceasefire. But backing that up with saying, you got to approach us and you got to tell us, talking to Russia, you got to tell us you want peace. We're here behind Ukraine. We're with them. We're on the same page, and you got to make us a good offer if you want us to stop helping them. And if you don't make us an offer, we're going to help them more. And there were elements of that in Keith Kellogg's original peace plan. So again, I have some hope that we might get to something like that. But yeah, I would have liked to see more strength from the get-go, not as much of an urgency for getting to peace.
With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. We will now be moving to 3-minute speeches just because the queue, for some reason, tends to explode right as we are coming to the end of the debate. So we'd love to get through as many of you as we can. So now, going to our next affirmative, Paul, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk a little bit about history. How did we become, the guardian of the world? And it happened in 2 steps, I think. One was World War II, where we were the only combatant who came out undamaged in our own nation. So we were at that point, one of the most powerful countries in the world. And the collapse of the Soviet Union really put us forward as, for a while, the only world power. So, recognize we have not always had this level of responsibility. It's interesting, when I learned about the Marshall Plan in my youth, I thought, wow, it's wonderful how benevolent and altruistic we were. And then later, as I learned more history, I came to understand that actually everybody should be very thankful to the Soviet Union for scaring us enough to actually put forth all that investment in the Marshall Plan. Something else is just kind of an experience I had that's kind of interesting. I lived in South America for a while, and I was teaching English to somebody who was a pretty powerful man in Brazil. And he told me if it wasn't for the United States, Argentina and Brazil would have gone to war a long time ago. But he said, but the Americans won't let them do it. And I was really struck by that. I think, Pax Americana is not that much different from Pax Romana 2,000 years ago. It's wonderful for the people who like the program, not so good for people who want their own program and don't fit in. The Celts in one case, and in our case, Muslim nations. The whole Pax Americana thing doesn't seem to work for them. I think a lot of our spending is only apparently altruistic, but really, we're spreading our values and culture, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And one of the things that Doge has brought out, is we're finding out that apparently we have been at least spending some money spreading woke culture, with which, a lot of us really don't agree, so that's not spreading democracy and representative government, that's spreading something else. So again, this whole strategy often fails and is a waste, particularly with Muslim nations. We have not figured out how to deal with Islam. We have no clue.
30 seconds.
And a couple of last things I'll mention. I think, hopefully the good that can come out with what Trump is doing is making Europe step up to, do their own defense rather than us paying for them. And my last point that I just want to make is self-care is essential. You got to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help anybody else. Don't jump in and, save somebody from drowning if you can't swim. So those are my thoughts. It's kind of rambling, but, just some of my own experiences and thoughts.
Thank you to our speaker. Let's go to Phil for a question of curiosity.
I'd like to ask the speaker specifically what he means by spreading woke culture through the world.
Yeah, well, apparently, and I had never heard any of this until Doge came along. But, the claim is that, we've been paying for, like a lot of transgender operations in India, and certainly seem to have found cases of paying for transgender operations outside of the United States.
And one more question, a new questioner. Let's go to Ken. Ken, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. My question would be to the speaker is, it's a follow-up to what was raised earlier. How can we trust what Doge is actually saying? We're referring to that group or that movement, if you will, as a source of information, but we've also been made aware of a lot of discrepancy in the information that's been put out by Doge. So how can we assume that when we talk about woke from Doge, that's actually accurate information?
I think a wonderful life principle that I try to abide by: trust but verify.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. Let's go now to Michelle for a speech in the negative. Michelle, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and you'll all be gratified to know I did press my unmute button, so I'm learning. So there's so many things that have come up in the discussion that are really, I think, very moving and provocative. I'm going to try and focus a little bit on how we can use conversations like this to move us across the divide and the differences, because that was something I talked about earlier. So I think when, as a country, we think about the globe, and sometimes the word globalism, that's an epithet that we dare not even consider. But I think, when globalism strips American working class of ability to earn a living, then globalism is probably not so great. But if globalism means understanding that we're all part of a planet with limited resources, that so many of the issues we face require international efforts, climate change, control of diseases, allocation of resources, then I think a perspective that goes beyond our shores is important. And if we start to think about people who are different than us religiously and in race and ethnicity and custom, that broadens our perspectives, and then we become more able to include them. And God, there's another highly loaded word, inclusive, but that word could mean that we really view the world's citizens as all humans. And there was reference to Christianity, and I understand this is allegedly a Christian country with Christian values. So my Christian value for everyone would be that we are all children of God, both here and elsewhere. Even Vladimir Putin is a child of God, although apparently he turned away from God and decides to hang out with Satan. But my point, I hope, will carry. I want to suggest that the idea that we are fair-minded to the rest of the world does not mean that we should deprive our own citizens and disadvantage them. And I would suggest that if we have poverty and tremendous income inequality within our own country, or we have an incredibly absurd level of poor distribution of wealth with a few people at the top incredibly wealthy and very powerful, they're not here in our audience participating with us, the average citizen.
30 seconds.
One of their many mansions, that the issue of taking care of ourselves at home is important, and it's without it we've gained nothing. But I don't think that if we include the rest of the world, maybe that will inspire us to be generous to our people at home as well as those abroad. So thank you for your time.
Perfect timing. Let's go to questions of curiosity for the speaker. Do I see any questions? I do. Betsy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have not been to one of these before, and I am so appreciative. It's just awesome to be here. I hope I can stay focused enough. I want to reference something the speaker said and something the previous speaker said.
Stick only to this speaker, if you please.
Okay. So I care for my mom full time. She's 97. She has major cognitive decline. And many times over the past 5 years, I have thought I could not care more. I could not manage to do more or to even do what was on my plate. And I'm still here, and I actually have more resources now than I did, even though it has felt all along the way as though I had no energy and no space enough in my head to find more resources. You know, you're supposed to build a village and you're supposed to put the oxygen mask on and all of that while you are, you know, haven't. So what I wanted to ask the speaker is that from the very microcosmic to the macrocosmic, a somewhat similar point, that by not saying we can't, even when it seems impossible, if the aspiration is in alignment with what we value, almost to trust the aspiration and reach out, keep at it. I just felt a resonance in.
Let's go to our speaker and see what does she think about that. Thank you for the question.
Well, I think I understand that you're saying that
the speaker is saying, the questioner is saying.
The questioner is saying that it's easy to feel hopeless and discouraged in the face of, you know, tremendous challenges, both personally and globally. I think we have a capacity to be hopeful. I think we have a capacity to be positive. We also have the capacity to not do as well. And so, you know, if we have some mutual support, like the reason that these events, I think, are moving to you is because usually people of different points of view, with different levels of, you know, ways of looking at it, but somehow we're all here. And the fact we're here says that it matters to have this kind of conversation and the experience of just being with other people. I mean, people said stuff that I went, oh my God. But by this time of the hour, by about 9:35, somehow something changes in your heart and you feel more optimistic. So maybe that's kind of what you're getting at, that when you hang in there, you can move yourself to a more positive place. You know, is that an answer that means anything? It's like, which wolf do you feel? Do you feed the generous, hopeful wolf or the negative, you know, aggrieved wolf? You have a choice. But it helps to be encouraged by those around you.
All right. Last question for this speaker, if we can keep it brief, because then we're going to sprint through the last few speakers. Mark.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm wondering whether the speaker thinks the U.S. should do both.
Well, absolutely. I think you can, you know, walk and chew gum, definitely. I do it all the time, even though the gum sticks to my fake teeth. So sure, it's not one or the other. It was, can you find some dynamic relationship between both, where you do things you need to at home, and then you give out of that, you feel generous. But also, I think it's okay to have self-interest. We can't solve anything by ourselves. Either as Americans, we can't solve it, and globally, we can't solve it either. And it's neither, and the either or dichotomy, I don't think is helpful. Absolutely not.
Thank you to our speaker and our questioners. All right. Seeing what time it is, we have 4 more speakers. I am going to offer each one 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and we will not be taking questions. We will do a lightning round. So for our next affirmative speaker, I want to go to Al Smith. You have 2.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I tend to be a globalist. I think America should be the shining light on the hill. We should be a role model of democracy. But unfortunately, I look at our country today and we have eroded to such a point that we have to clean up the domestic problems that we have. And it's a laundry list. When 70% of Americans say we're going in the wrong direction, Americans get it. They see it. They feel it. They know it in so many ways. Let me give you an example. National debt. To me, this is the biggest stealth issue, that it's not a sexy issue, and no one's an economist, so they really don't get it or put it aside. But all the economists and the CBO says we're headed for a cliff and we better try to correct it soon. Our education, look at the levels of education compared to other countries. We continuously slide down the rankings for the last 10, 20 years. We have a government that I don't know how to put it, but it's broken. It can't solve problems. My representative in Connecticut told me when she first went to Congress, she was stunned that the mentality is, if my party wins, the other party will lose. And that's all you should be thinking about and getting reelected. That's not a democracy. That is big time problems. We have an immigration system. We can't reach common ground and solve it. And there's common ground there. We have inner cities for the last 40 years with poor education, no economic opportunity, drugs, okay, crime. And we haven't done anything because government doesn't even want to touch the inner cities. Social Security and Medicare are going broke. People can't afford a college without coming out with $200,000 in debt. People can't buy a house anymore. That scares me to death. That's not a country that we can no longer look to the other side and say, oh, we'll take care of it. Because our institutions are not taking care of it. I'm sorry, I want to be a globalist, but we have some major problems domestically that we must address, and I don't see anybody addressing it.
Thank you to our speaker. Let's go now to a speech in the negative from Cameron. Cameron Mirmelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all. I'm very young, so I'm very humbled to be here. I just want to rephrase the question a little bit. I think in and what our current political situation is. It's not really a question of what we should prioritize, but rather what we shouldn't antagonize. I think there's a lot of antagonizing going on both domestically, internationally right now, from tariffs to threats of annexation abroad that end up hurting us domestically, to what some of us have mentioned in the conversation already with Doge. I mean, there have been reports that have been released, but these are only fragments of reports. There's not complete documentations that are being released. So we need to consider the transparency and validity when we're looking into these. But a lot of us, I think we can all agree that we want to be Americans, help one another. So we have to look at, are the actions that we currently are taking actually helping our fellow Americans? I'm a student right now, so I've personally seen the effects of cuts in the Department of Education, Department of Justice, EPA. And these are all questions which directly impact our domestic scope in tandem to what's happening internationally. So I think we all agree that, again, someone said that you can walk and chew gum, which I really like, that both are important, but rather than picking one to prioritize, we need to make sure that we don't antagonize either of them. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you to our speaker. Okay, our penultimate speaker for the night will be Sam. Sam, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to speak tonight and eager to share some thoughts. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation, so I want to thank the entire audience here tonight for sharing the views they have. The first thing is we just heard of this idea, the walk or chew gum idea, and I was sitting on that and I think, walk or chew gum, can we do both? And I just think no. A presidential administration is short, fast, and scrunched, and the president, when he wakes up, or when the president, or the administration, when they all collectively wake up each morning, they have a 12-hour workday. Realistically, they have that limited amount of time to pursue their agenda. And given the constraints of our system, the constraints that I so value, there's only so much that can get done. So priorities do matter. And this debate about which priority we should put over the other is an absolutely essential one to have, and it has implications for policy. Otherwise, we wouldn't have contested elections over different priorities. When I think we can all kind of agree with the trivially true idea that both things do matter on some level. But I think I'm arguing in the affirmative here because recently I felt some sympathies for the people who in the administration, especially the ideas being espoused by people in the administration that sort of align with the affirmative stance. So I want to reference the conversation that was leaked in the Atlantic, or to the Atlantic editor recently. This is a fascinating development in our politics, frankly. And we saw the vice president in there say something to the effect of, if you think we should do this, referencing, I hope I'm referencing something that like common knowledge, but the plans that were being discussed were military plans, and the vice president shared that he said, "I just hate bailing Europe out again." And I have to admit, I was sympathetic to that. A previous speaker said that if there's good that comes of this, it'll be getting Europe to stand taller, to bulk up its efforts. There are dozens of developed democracies, and each of their leaders get to come to the table and think about how they can advance their goals and win the favor of their constituencies.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But there's only one developed democracy who comes to the table and has to, because of its military might and technological prowess, has to think about possibly bailing out other countries and doing something on the basis of the entire global order, without may have nothing to do in that present moment with the interests of its particular constituents, and that's the United States, and that's a good problem to have. But given that fact, the fact of our global strength, I do think there is something to be said for, specifically for us, returning to a position of focusing on our domestic interests. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. And for our final speech of the night, let's go to Anne. Do I have Anne Vargo?
There we go. Okay. Yes, I'm speaking in the negative about whether or not the US should prioritize domestic interest over international leadership. Because if you look at our budget, we already do prioritize domestic interests. We don't spend as a percent of our budget that much on foreign aid, or if you look at defense, and having military installations throughout the world, but that's for us. That's defense. Okay, we need allies in the world the same way you learn growing up that it's good to have friends. In fact, it's essential to your well-being. Nobody survives alone, not people, not countries. Helping our allies, whether weapons to Ukraine or food and medicine to Africa, is in our best interest. And helping our allies means taking up the mantle of leadership, because we are the largest democracy in the world and we have the largest army. Some reasons. The world is smaller than it has ever been. We are intertwined with trade, we share microbes through constant travel, and we share the effects of global climate change. You cannot wall off the world's problems. Also, we are a great nation because we are a good nation, a generous nation. I grew up in the years, my father fought in World War II. I'm a baby boomer. So I grew up with the idea of the American GI, in European countries giving chocolate to starving little kids. I mean, we have always been a generous country. And do we really want to become smaller in all ways, including how the rest of the world looks at us? And NATO has kept the world safe for 80 years. Have we made blunders along the way? Absolutely, usually because of our own self-interest. And if we abandon aid to the poor and starving in other parts of the world, as what we are doing in dismantling USAID, other large countries vying to be superpowers will step in and fill the void. China will be the good guy, the one who will gain influence, and the one who's able to spread their message about how countries should be run. So I don't think you have to choose. In fact, we've already chosen, we spend more money domestically, but it is very important. We can do both, and we will always need friends throughout the world. Thank you.
And with that, our final speaker is thanked. All right, and all of our speakers and questioners, thank you so much for participating. I do want to acknowledge, as much as we sprinted through the finish and went a few minutes over our formal stop time, some of you didn't get to speak. We're gonna remember who those names are, and remember, come to you first, maybe, if you come back for the next one. We hope to see you at an upcoming debate. So in a moment, I'm going to smile upon a motion to adjourn, but please don't go anywhere just yet. The last few minutes of this debate session are reserved for a very important ritual. So for now, I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Do I have such a motion?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Having been moved and seconded, this debate is hereby adjourned. You can call each other you. My name is Jessie again, and we have now just had a pretty wide-ranging conversation with a lot of different angles, a lot of different values thrown out there. What I would like to know is this, and please feel free to raise your Zoom hand or type in the chat if you prefer. I'd like to know, what did you learn, or what did you enjoy? Anyone want to get us started? Let's go to Marley.
Thank you. I guess I don't need to call you Madam Chair anymore, but I feel like I learned a lot just about, it was really inspiring to hear everyone talk so passionately about how they feel we should be spending our attention and money. I think pretty much everyone who spoke really gave such a strong personal opinion on it, and it was just fascinating to see where everyone kind of agrees on some basic things, and as far as everything else, I don't know, it was all understandable to me, and it was all like I was able to connect with everything everyone was saying, and I appreciated that.
Thank you so much, Marley. Let's go to Betsy. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
I enjoyed the whole thing. I consume a lot of news, and I rarely have a chance to articulate what I am thinking and feeling about what I am reading and listening to. And it was very interesting and helpful to hear people articulate things that I think and feel very well. And it was also helpful to have people with viewpoints different than mine articulate them well enough that I come away with a better understanding of some things. So I really appreciate the whole thing hugely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Thanks for joining us for your first debate. Let's go to Bill, and the chat is now open. So if you can also type in there, but Bill, what did you learn? What did you enjoy?
So I enjoyed it on several levels. One is it was not very partisan. I mean, I could not tell who was a Republican, who was a Democrat, because everybody was saying things that just were not very partisan at all. But the second thing is it caused me to analyze some of the words. For example, the word prioritize. Several people said you can walk and chew gum at the same time. And therefore, I think the word prioritize was irrelevant because we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But I also analyzed the word domestic interests and international leadership. When I think of interests,
let's not go into a speech here for the debate. That part's over.
Okay. All right. So all right. So I guess I should stop there. But interests and leadership, I both chewed on both of those words.
Food for thought. And we never define terms because we love to see what you guys come up with. So thanks, Bill. Appreciate those thoughts. Let's go to Lori.
Thank you, everyone. I learned that media in its various forms and variations still plays a big part on our opinions and can influence our opinions. And we do need to trust and verify. But my thing I enjoyed the most was Anne Vargo. I mean, at the end, that was just a mic drop. That you just really wrapped it up so well.
I wonder if Anne Vargo would like to make a comment. I happen to know Anne. She's my mom. She doesn't want people to know that. So you just made her night, I'm sure.
Supposed to talk about that, Jesse.
Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I spent the day thinking about it. I feel very strongly about some of these things, so I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I do love that we do this. I think this is so important. And one of the comments that I would make is that I learned that younger people really do think differently, and their world has been shaped so differently. And I want to learn more about that, because they're the ones taking charge. So thank you.
And I just want to say it's my mom's first time speaking in a Braver Angels debate as well, even though I've been here for a while. So yeah. Thanks, Mom. Let's go to Stephen. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
Well, I actually am so happy to see so many people giving such deep thought to these issues. And what I really want to say that since it's my first time, I'm very impressed with the process and with the moderation, and I will definitely be back.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We look forward to seeing you at another debate.